Welcome back. And obviously, David is still very much on the run. And I'm sharing lessons from 2 Samuel 16 to 18. Now, Ziba saw David's escape as an opportunity to prove his loyalty and gain an advantage over his master Mephibosheth. He probably didn't think he was worthy of all that David had given to him, that's Mephibosheth, because he was lame, crippled and previously abandoned. The gifts he presented to David were greatly needed and appreciated by David. Those are the donkeys and the food and the fruits. But he, of course, had an agenda. When David heard that Mephibosheth had remained in Jerusalem, he accepted Ziba's story as true. But we'll soon see the other side of that as we read on. Even though it's hard to see how Absalom's rebellion could have benefited a cripple like Mephibosheth, but at that point I'm sure David was just willing to just believe anything. If his son and his advisor could betray him, I'm sure in his mind's eye he's like, yes, who else cannot betray me, and it's obvious that David remained suspicious of Saul's descendants, even though he showed him kindness, for him to have believed that so easily. And I've also heard it preached that him bringing Mephibosheth into his palace, or into his kingdom, was a strategy. You know how they say keep your enemies close, your friends close but your enemies closer. I've heard it preached that might have been a strategy for David as well. Shimea was one of the tribe of Benjamin, and he was a relation to Saul, to Saul, and he probably despised David for taking the throne from their people. So he was very glad to see his fall. So obviously I'm talking about the time when Shimea was just insulting David and throwing sand and stone after him as he was fleeing. He called him a bloodthirsty man because he made him responsible for the deaths of Abner in 2 Samuel 3:27 and Ishbosheth in 2 Samuel 4:7, and rightly so in the death of Uriah in 2 Samuel 11:15. But David recognized that beyond the curses of an angry man, he was perhaps hearing the voice of God. So he submitted to the correction he deserved and prevented his servant from killing Shimei. But yet hoped in the mercy and the goodness of the Lord for the future. I thought that was very humbling, and to me it epitomized that saying when Jesus said, if they strike you, give them the other cheek. Even though it's very hard, but that's what we see happen here with David and Shimei. Hushai was an excellent mole. Remember Hushai, his friend? And he won over Absalom with his seemingly wise counsel. Ahitophel, on the other hand, gave him terrible advice to sleep with his father's concubines in the presence of everybody. This will ensure that there will be no reconciliation between them, because it was the worst possible insult, and declared in effect that David was dead, because you don't take a king's wives or his concubine unless he dies. However, unbeknownst to him, he was fulfilling God's punishment for David for the Bathsheba-Uriah debacle that happened in chapter 2, verse 11. Hushai won David to escape and he was helped by spies and a very resourceful woman. Ahitophel committed suicide because he realized that death would be his reward when David got his throne back. And with Absalom trusting Hushai over him, he was sure that his time was over. And I also believe that with everything that happened, he really believed that Absalom wasn't the real king and that David was going to come back. So he, did what he believed would be done to him. But then I don't even believe that could have been done, because we've seen that David is also very, very merciful. David asking his warriors to deal gently with Absalom was him speaking as a father and not a king. Only death could put an end to the conflicts which jeopardized the stability and the future of the kingdom. How ironic that Absalom's pride was the cause of his downfall, with his hair being caught in a thicket and him hanging. And Joab obviously had it out for Absalom, as he offered a bounty for him. Because when the servant came back to say, oh, I saw Absalom suspended with his hair, and he was like, why didn't you kill him? I could have given you X amount of silver and gold. So clearly he had a bounty on his head. Ahimaaz was excited about the victory, not realizing that David may not take the news of Absalom's death well. Remember Saul, when Saul died and the guy that came to tell David thought he was doing him a solid, and he ended up getting killed. So, but Joab didn't allow him to run with the news to perhaps prevent his death, and he used a slave instead to deliver the message of Absalom's death. And David mourned his son very loudly and very sadly. He mourned for Absalom. Now here's where I saw God in these chapters. Ahithophel's advice to Absalom was received once and rejected the second time. God is in the nuances of seeming coincidences. He works perfectly to bring to pass the fulfillment of what he promised. In 12:11, he had made pronouncements against David, and we see the things working out to fulfill them. We saw it once, in Ahithophel's first advice, but then also in the answer to David's prayer against Ahitophel in 15:11, when he said God should make Ahithophel's counsel as foolishness. So God's providence and sovereignty works in our lives to bring his will to pass. So whether it is in seeming things that are happening to us or for us, or happening to us or by us, everything works together for God's plan. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we'll be back to the Psalms, and I'll see you here. Have a good day. Bye.